that was enacted last Friday. It became law, and as many of you have probably been reading or seeing on the news, this program is being quickly developed by banks to meet the standards and the guidelines that have been set out by the U.S. Treasury and the SBA. Joining me on the call from City National is Christina Ashby, and she'll be talking about a second product from the SBA that is also being enacted, which is different from the Paycheck Protection Program, and she'll get into some details on that. And then I believe Jeanette Bosch is on, and Jeanette is the local relationship manager for business banking that will be ending the call and letting you know next steps if you have any questions. So I'm just going to start today. Let's make sure my screen is working. There we go. So there is myself and Christina and the Payroll Protection Program. So as I mentioned, the Payroll Protection Program was enacted as part of the CARES Act, the $2.2 trillion stimulus package, which passed last Friday. The Paycheck Protection Program is a specific component of that stimulus package, which is for $349 billion. And what the function of the Paycheck Protection Program is to provide small to medium-sized businesses with loans to cover their cost of payroll, as well as to cover their cost of interest expense, rent, leases, and utilities during a specific time period. One thing you are going to hear myself and Christina talk about throughout this presentation is what's called the covered period. This is a specific language in the legislation, which is the period between February 15th, 2020 to June 30th, 2020. That is the dates in which the legislation assumes that businesses have been or will continue to be impacted by the coronavirus epidemic. So the loan amount under the Paycheck Protection Program is calculated by interested borrowers who are applying in the following way. The borrower should take the average total monthly payments for their payroll, what they actually paid during the 1-year period from January 1st, 2019 to December 31st, 2019. So for those 12 months, using payroll records, come up with the average monthly payroll, basically the 2019 annual, and divide by 12, and then multiply that monthly average by 2.5. The loan amount is then the lesser of that calculation, or $10 million. So the big picture on this program is, as I said prior, it is focused on small and medium-sized businesses, including sole proprietors and the self-employed. It is geared toward companies with no greater than 500 employees. However, there are some very important exceptions to that 500 employee limit. If the borrower is in an industry, an NAICS industry code that begins with the first 2 digits 72, and those primarily encompass everything in the hotel, restaurant, and franchise industries, Then the 500 employee test is per physical location. What that means is if you own a business or are part of a business which is looking to get a loan under the PPP program, and you have multiple locations as a restaurant, as a hotel, and perhaps greater than 500 people, you will still qualify. The test is just that you're limited to 500 people, or excuse me, employees per physical location. In addition, if the business applying for a PPP loan is a franchise, the normal affiliation rules do not apply. And that means that you do not have to affiliate control of those franchises as would typically be done under another SBA program. The purpose of the Paycheck protection loans is, and it's very explicit in the legislation, the primary purposes are to retain workers, maintain their payroll, to pay mortgage interest on any loans against properties owned by the borrower, to pay rent of the borrower, and to make utility payments of the borrower. Those are all purposes that are covered in the legislation and are allowed to be the funds to be used for. There are some very specific conditions of this program that we believe, that City National Bank believes, are very advantageous for the borrowers. First of all, there are no personal guarantees required on these loans. It is a loan by the borrowing entity with no guarantees by ownership. There will be no prepayment penalty on any of these loans. There is no credit elsewhere test, and that's a specific test that the SBA has had on all of its other products, wherein the borrower and the lender must assert that the SBA loan is essentially a last resort, that there is no, quote, credit elsewhere available. So that credit elsewhere test is no longer applicable. The maturity of these loans will be 2 years for any loan amount that's not forgiven. And the forgiveness piece we'll get into in a moment. There's no collateral requirement, and by that we mean these loans are specifically unsecured to the business, and the presumption is that if you are applying for a Paycheck protection loan, that the borrower has been adversely impacted by coronavirus. So, payroll costs. This has been one of the touchiest, I guess I'll say, areas of how borrowers and their advisors believe is calculated. How payroll costs are calculated has been a source of some dispute by different advisors to certain borrowers. So I want to go through how we have read the legislation and what we believe specifically on the payroll costs that are included in calculating the loan amount, and then what do not to include. So first, payroll costs are all wages, salary, commission, cash tips gross amount of salary, any vacation, parental, family, medical, sick leave that is paid, any allowance for separation or dismissal of employees, all healthcare benefits, retirement benefits, state, local taxes paid by the company, and all federal payroll taxes paid by the company. The payroll costs that you are going to compile for your loan amount should not include any compensation, salaries, or wages above $100,000 paid to any individual employee. So any employee above $100,000 in salary, that salary is capped at $100,000. Any compensation of employees whose principal residence, if they live outside of the United States but are paid by a borrowing company, those employees are not covered. And then there are some employees that if they are qualified for sick or medical leave under a different portion of this act, they are not covered, because that would be, they are covered differently. So that we have not seen yet in the thousands of applications City National Bank has received, but we just want to have it there in case it is applicable to any borrower. So after the calculation of the loan amount, we believe the most important next step is to understand the loan forgiveness. I will put a caveat on this discussion that the SBA and the Treasury have not provided specific rules and guidance on the loan forgiveness, only high-level information. As I said, it's not even been a full week since this legislation was enacted. So the guidance that we have been receiving, and it has updated daily, sometimes more than once a day, that all that guidance has been focused on calculation of the loan amount, what is eligible and ineligible. I assume that once the funds from this program have been dispersed, there is an 8-week period, and I will get to that, during which loan forgiveness is calculated. I believe we'll get a lot more details at that time on any questions you may have on the forgiveness piece. But just to give you what we do know now, loan forgiveness on the payroll protection loans is available. It will be based on the actual use of those funds that you receive as part of a payroll protection loan, and all of the funds that are used during the following 8 weeks after the loan is funded, that are used to make payroll costs, pay mortgage interest, pay rent, and pay certain utility payments. So after the loan is funded, let's call that day 0, the next 8 weeks, it's going to be very important to keep meticulous records on everything that is spent, copies of checks on payroll, in mortgage interest, rent payments, utility payments. At the end of the 8-week period, the borrower is then going to submit to their bank all these documents and a certification that says, I am seeking forgiveness of whatever X loan amount of my loan, and that can be up to 100% of the principal balance. It's also important to know that forgiveness is specifically in the legislation that it will not be taxable. So any loan forgiven will not be subject to a tax liability for the year. One important part of the guidance we received in some adjustments in the last few days is that the government wants at least 75% of the loan proceeds that are going to be forgiven to be specifically used on payroll. So $100,000 loan, if you're seeking for the entire $100,000 to be forgiven, they will look for documentation that at least $75,000 of the 100 was used to cover payroll costs. Before we get to the documents, one more thing I want to talk about the loan forgiveness. There's a second test on the loan forgiveness that what the government is seeking is that the borrowers will show documentation that on 2 dates, the total number of employees that the business had at February 15th, 2020, which is the first day of the covered period. So we're looking backwards a couple of months to when the coronavirus pandemic began in the United States. So February 15th, 2020, and the second test will be June 30th, 2020. What the forgiveness, in addition to what I talked about, how you calculate how much is eligible for forgiveness, there will be a second calculation on a number of employees. So if you have, as a business, retained or rehired up to the same number of employees you had pre-epidemic, you are eligible for 100% forgiveness of the number you calculated that I just went through. If you had 100 employees and at June 30th, 2020, you have 90 employees, you will be eligible for 90% forgiveness of the eligible amount we just went through. So it's important to remember that the legislation is to continue to pay employees, and it's also to be used as a material inducement for the borrowers to maintain their payroll or even rehire any employees that have to be furloughed or laid off. So documents that you need to gather if you're going to make a payroll protection program application. The application is pretty simple. It's 2 pages and then a few pages of disclosures. It is a standard application from the SBA. No matter who you go through, we certainly hope it would be City National Bank, the application is the same. In addition, you're asked to provide 2019 payroll records and year-to-date through February 15th, 2020 payroll records. Some document that would show the number of employees you had at December 31st, 2019, as well as at February 15th. Make sure you know what industry your business is in based on the NAICS code. That's important, so you know what your total employee number qualification is. You're going to need to put together your IRS Form 940, the annual federal unemployment tax return, as well as 941, the quarterly federal tax return, payroll summary for the year, a W-2 summary for the year, and then a document where you calculate or show any employees within your total payroll that may have earned over $100,000, and if it's none, just a document that says none. And then we're going to need a breakdown of your payroll, and sometimes payroll processors have been providing this breakdown of your payroll benefits and how they aggregate into the total payroll costs for 2019. All right, so I'm gonna recap some of the things we've covered. So the Payroll Protection Program is a loan program. It is $369 million. It is on a first come, first served basis, meaning that as the funds are used and allocated, they are not replenished. So every loan that you apply for, it is put into a waiting line by the bank you choose as they input it into the SBA system manually, and then those funds are reserved until they are dispersed. It's important to get in line to get a reservation against the $369 billion. Employees with companies with 500 or less employees, unless they meet the other size standards that I went through. There's those important exceptions for hotels and restaurants and franchises. The benefits are that after the first 8 weeks, eligible expenses that the funds are used for will then be forgiven and canceled. We at City National Bank are providing these loans. We are an SBA preferred lender. We have been taking, the legislation was enacted midday last February. We have a team that has been working on these, over 100 people at the bank, and we're a bank that's a community bank of 800 employees. So at many times up to 20% of our entire workforce has been focused on doing this 24 hours a day since Friday afternoon last week. So we're going on day 6. All we've been doing in those teams is putting these applications in for the clients and prospective clients of the bank. I believe Jeanette Bosch is on the phone, so she'll wrap up at the end and tell you where you go to and how to reach out to her if you're interested. And again, loans are capped at 2.5 times average monthly payroll, or $10 million, the lesser of. I think we went through how you calculate the numbers, what you need to calculate them, what the loan can be used for during the covered period from February 15th to June 30th, 2020, and that you need to keep meticulous records after the funds are dispersed of what the funds are used for, so then you can seek forgiveness 8 weeks after the loan is dispersed. The forgiveness is in writing from the borrowers 8 weeks, as I said, after loans are dispersed, and I believe the SBA, that goes direct to the bank. The bank sends it to the SBA, and there's a 60-day time period where you get then documentation that your loan, or the up to the 100% that you have sought forgiveness, has been forgiven. However, during the first 6 months of the loan, and that every loan has the same terms, 1% interest rate, you are not, the loan is automatically deferred and no interest is paid from closing for the first 6 months. So the assumption is, and why it's set up like this, is that there is no cost to the borrower, and there should be no cost to the borrower for any loan amount that is expected to be forgiven during that process. The first 8 weeks, 60 days to then process forgiveness, and during that entire period of time, there will be no interest accruing. It'll all be deferred. All right, so I believe Christina is here with us as well, and Christina is going to cover the EIDL loan program from the SBA, which is very different than the PPP. So Christina, if you'd like to go ahead, and I will move the slideshow for you when you let me know you're ready to move forward.
Okay, sounds great. Good morning, everybody. You can go ahead. EIDL stands for the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, and this is a loan that is a lower interest option of up to $2 million with principal and interest deferred at the administration's discretion, and it's available to pay for expenses that could have met that the business would have had to meet if the disaster had not occurred. This loan is one that you apply directly through the SBA, so the bank has no involvement as the intermediary between the transaction. So you do have to apply directly through the SBA and go through their process. So I'm going to preface the conversation that while I know a good amount about the program, I'm not very intimately engaged in their underwriting process and how it's going. I can just give you what I know from industry knowledge. So as you can see here on the slide, recipients of an EIDL may also still claim the employee retention credit, which is a tax-based credit that was also enacted under the CARES Act. Employers may receive a credit against employment taxes for 50% of the qualified wages paid for each employee during that time. So the EIDL program went into effect a little earlier than the PPP program and started on January 31st and is going to be running until the end of the year, December 31st. There has been some rumble in the industry saying that they could perhaps go past that date just because there's also a continued backlog of applications, but as of right now, those are the dates. Now, with this program, you are also eligible for a $10,000 grant. So it doesn't have the same forgiveness feature as the PPP. However, there is a $10,000 grant that is awarded to you upfront upon application within 3 days of them receiving your application that does not need to be paid back. And that could be used for payroll costs or any like payroll related or operating expenses that you need to operate your business. As far as the tax credit is concerned, I know that there's that tax credit and some others. So I would strongly recommend that you talk to your CPA to determine what benefits you can get. And the tax benefits do not have any implications with the EIDL or the PPP program. You can move on to the next slide.
Sure.
So as I said, the program is up to $2 million with low interest rates of 3.75 for small businesses and 2.75 for not-for-profits. The maturity on these loans can go up to 30 years. Doesn't necessarily mean you'll get 30 years, but it could be anywhere in between like a 2-year time frame to a 30-year. And the requirements for this program is that you have to have less than 500 employees. And while they are lending to not-for-profits, there is an exclusion for faith-based organizations that promote religion that would not be eligible under this program. You can move on to the next slide.
All right.
Okay. So the EIDL program can be used for very similar uses under the PPP program, and I want to kind of dive into that a little bit because the two programs are intended to be complementary of one another rather than exclusive, and it's important that you understand the dynamics between the two, because while you can have both loans, you can't use them for the same purposes, and so I'll get a little bit into that. However, it can be used, the EIDL program can be used for providing paid sick leave. Is somebody having a hard time hearing me? Okay, just want to make sure, sorry. Making rent or mortgage payments and repaying obligations that cannot be met due to revenue losses. This is not one that you could use, say you want to expand your business or you had some equipment that you wanted to purchase that you couldn't purchase before. Unfortunately, it is strictly limited to impacts of COVID-19, and you would have to attest that that is the case. And it's really to help kind of cover operating costs during that time. So there is no true forgiveness under the EIDL program, as I previously mentioned. However, there is that $10,000 emergency grant. You can move on.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so let me stop there because I want to dive into it a little bit more in regards to the relation between PPP and EIDL. And so, because I get this question a lot, I want to make it pretty clear so that everybody here can understand. So the EIDL program has a lot more eligible use of proceeds than the PPP program. The PPP is limited strictly to payroll related costs, and then you have like utilities and other expenses. However, if you are interested in getting both loans, it's important for you to know that they cannot have the same use of proceeds. If they do, there are options for you. So if, let's say that you went and applied immediately on January 31st, you applied for the loan, you received your funds, and you've already started spending the funds to try to keep your business afloat. If those use of proceeds are eligible use of proceeds under PPP, meaning payroll related costs, utilities, and mortgage interest, then you would have to refinance your EIDL loan into the PPP loan under the same loan. That $10,000 that you perhaps already received as part of the grant money, that $10,000 will be reduced on your PPP loan because you're going to be eligible for the forgiveness, and the government essentially doesn't want the double dipping of forgiveness on the loans. If perhaps you use the money for something different on the EIDL loan, and it wasn't related to payroll or anything that was eligible under the PPP loan, then you could actually add that on to your loan amount. However, I want to caution you in making that decision because the proceeds that were added on to your PPP loan from the EIDL loan will not be eligible for the forgiveness. And it will be subject to the new terms under your PPP loan. So let's use as an example, maybe you had an EIDL loan and the SBA offered you a 7-year or a 10-year maturity on your loan. Well, now that amount of money is going to be taken out for only 2 years based on the terms of the PPP loan. While it has the benefit of a lower interest rate because the interest rate is 1%, you are going to be amortizing it over a shorter space of time, which then means that your payments are going to be much higher. And in situations where cash flow is a concern during these periods of time, just keep that in mind because you want to do ultimately what's the best thing for your business. One other point that I want to make is while the PPP loan does have a great forgiveness feature, it is payroll related and also based on headcounts and payroll related costs. The EIDL loan qualifications are not based on that. So a benefit to perhaps a borrower that maybe has very small payroll numbers is that they could apply for an EIDL loan and likely get more under that program, despite the fact that it doesn't have the forgiveness feature. So just kind of want to compare the two programs so that everybody is making the most informed decision on what's best for their business. And ultimately, if you have any additional questions, I can always answer them to the best of my ability. And the SBA district office is actually working with not-for-profit organizations that will work very intimately with your businesses to help you prepare the financials and the applications at no cost to you. So if you needed those resources, I'd be happy to share those as well. And that's it for me.
All right. Thank you, Christina. Is Jeanette on the phone to wrap up for us and then we can take any questions?
Yes, absolutely. Can you hear me?
We do.
All right. Hi, how are you? I'm Jeanette Bosch. I'm a relationship manager, business market leader with City National. Some of you guys know me. I'm involved in the chamber. I will be your direct contact if you guys are interested in applying with us. We hope that you do. I am here basically 24 hours a day nowadays to answer your questions. You guys can reach me via email. Juan, I think at the end of this is, if you click one more slide, is my information.
Okay.
Not sure. The one
There
that
you go.
Okay, there you go, guys. So I'm Jeanette. You guys can email me at any time at jeanette.bosch@citynational.com, or you can reach me directly on my cell phone at 786-313-5546 if you're interested in applying with us. We are taking applications for clients and non-clients as well, as long as you develop a banking relationship with us and establish a bank account at City National, and hopefully we can expand that relationship in the future and help you with future needs. Again, I can answer any questions, guide you through the application process, and I will email you and advise you as to how to proceed if you're interested in applying.
Great. Alicia, any other words, or do we have any questions?
I don't see any questions on the chat,
Okay.
but if we can definitely open it up to anyone who might want to chime in. If anyone has any questions.
That would be great.
Okay, well, if anything else, I guess, does come up, you guys know you can reach out to Jeanette. I just want to thank City National Bank for this webinar. It's definitely very informative and something that people are going to be needing. If not now, possibly, in the next weeks.
Hello. Hello.
Oh, yes, we do have a question.
Yes. Can you go back and explain not the difference between the PPP and the EIDL, but the restrictions and commingling of the funds? So I apply the first day that the EIDL was available. I applied for 3 companies, and this week I applied with you guys for the PPP for the same 3 companies. So if I get the PPP before the EIDL, which are the ways that I have to spend that money?
Christina, you want to handle that?
Sure. So the EIDL, as you can imagine, it's being handled directly through the SBA. And so that being said, there is a little bit of a bottleneck with the number of applications, since it was pretty much the first program to be rolled out before legislation went into place for the PPP program. So what I have heard thus far is that it should really just be about a 3-week turnaround. So, I mean, if you're saying you applied in January, at the end of January, beginning of February, you likely should have gotten some response by now. But again, that's handled directly through the SBA, so we don't manage that process. However, under the legislation, they then worked with banks, because close to $350 billion is a lot of money. And to put that into perspective, the SBA administration did about $30 billion in loans last year. So over 300 is a very large number. And so that's why they decided to use the bank as an intermediary to be able to manage that process. So the eligible use of proceeds under the PPP program is strictly payroll-related costs, as well as utilities, rent, and mortgage interest. So if you were to get the PPP, the use of proceeds is limited to that. And unfortunately, if you were to use the funds for anything outside of that, it would actually be a violation of the program, and it would not be eligible for forgiveness when that time comes. Now, with the EIDL program, it's a broader use of proceeds, and it's not as monitored, I would say. You do have to attest that you're going to use the funds for the course of business based on, issues related to COVID-19. However, because it doesn't have the forgiveness component, there isn't the requirement for you to then come back to the SBA and show them all your records of what you've spent it on. So to be clear, when you're going to be applying for the forgiveness component with the PPP program, you would have to provide that documentation to the bank, and the bank then would have to submit that information to the SBA on your behalf to say you are eligible for the forgiveness. And so that is part of the reason why we at City National Bank recommend that if you're going to apply with us, that you should have your accounts with us as well, because it makes it a very seamless process for us to be able to guide you through the process of the loan forgiveness component, because all of your expenses related to the PPP program will be able to be easily tracked within our City National Bank accounts. Does that answer your question, or do you have any additional follow-up?
That's okay. I apply when I applied for the EIDL, it was the first day that they released it to Florida, so it was like 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago.
Okay, yeah. So I have heard it's been about a 21-day turnaround. Although, as you know, more and more people begin to apply, I think that turnaround time might be a little bit longer. But as of right now, what I've heard, it's been about anywhere between 3 to 3.5 weeks.
Thanks.
I have a question on self-employment. If you're self-employed, does this not apply?
Actually, it does. So there are 2 windows for applications. The first window started on April 3rd, and that was for small businesses and sole proprietors. And then the next wave of applications opens up tomorrow, and that's for 1099 independent contractors, as well as those business owners that are self-employed. So that window opens tomorrow. I will say that the SBA provided guidance to us on the original program that opens on April 3rd at 7:30 at night on April 2nd. So as you can imagine, we have been following very closely, but we're waiting on that final guidance to be able to make sure that we were implementing the program accordingly. I would suspect that we're going to get additional guidance today on self-employed and 1099 contractors. We have the general gist of what qualifies. However, I'm sure that the process might be a little bit different in the way that we look at it. But I would suggest tomorrow's your day to shine. And if you want to apply, go ahead and apply tomorrow. We should have more guidance around it later, probably today.
Okay, where would I apply?
You can apply directly with City National Bank. We would hope that you would, or you have the option to apply at any other financial institution that will accept applications. I know Wells Fargo stopped accepting applications for their clients because they were capped. A couple other banks kind of took a hiatus for a little bit. So, I mean, you can check with your local bank and see if they are offering it. If not, you know, we welcome you at City National Bank, and we'd be happy to take your application, and Jeanette can help you through the process.
Okay,
Yes,
great.
this is Jeanette. I'll be happy to help you, sir. Just
Okay,
contact me via email or on my phone as soon as, like Christina said, as soon as we have more guidance as to what the requirement will be or what that will look like from the government as to self-employed individuals or 1099s, I will guide you, sir.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
All right, do we have any other questions before we go back to where we're doing? All right. Well, I'd like to say thank you from the credit side. Christina and I have appreciated it. Jeanette, thank you for having us here. And then if there's any other words from the chamber, we could just say goodbye. You let us know.
No, I'm good on this end. Thank you guys so much.
All right. Thank you, Alicia.
Have a wonderful day.
You too.